Hello, everyone. I'm Neil Moseley, and I work with a group called the Church Cartographers. We are a group of pastors and ministers who work with congregations to chart new paths to relevancy and missional impact in a congregation's mission field. I'm pleased to have been invited by Reverend Cami Gaston to participate in this day of lay leadership training for the North Texas Conference. I grew up in the North Texas Conference and have worked in the conference at various local churches for almost 2 decades now. So it's a great pleasure to be with you to talk a little bit about the very necessary and important work of trustees in any local United Methodist church. Cami was a part of our mission story and resurrection story at White Rock UMC, where I am filming this today. We're in a hallway on our second floor at White Rock, a hallway that's now inhabited by a community partner, Studio Bella Arts for Kids. Cami was our district superintendent whenever we began our resurrection work at White Rock, and so I really appreciate her inviting me to participate in today's activities. Many folks don't realize this, but trustees' work is actually described in Scripture. In the Gospel according to Matthew, Jesus describes a recent temple trustees meeting saying, "Now I know what it's like to be cast out into the outer darkness where there's much wailing and gnashing of teeth." Hey, Bishop. What's up? Oh, wait. No, I mean, that's not what Jesus meant. No, I see. No. Yeah, totally. No. It's my bad. It's my bad. I'm not the best at exegesis. I get that. Just stick to the script. You got it. You got it. Oh, I understand. Bye. Sorry, just Bishop McKee calls me a lot, very interested in the work that I'm doing, just giving me a few notes on my video here. So moving on. Also, the trustees' work in the Wesleyan tradition was described by John Wesley primarily as a penance for missing 3 class meetings over the course of a 6-month period. Hold on one second again. It's Bishop again. Hey, buddy, what's up? Just talking about John Wesley. That's not historically accurate. Trustees' work is not a form of punishment. I see. I don't know. A couple more minutes. We got some material about leaking toilets and duct tape. You don't think that's funny? I've got an anecdote about a water stain that looks like St. Anselm of Canterbury. No, you're right. You're the bishop. You know better. I'm not an accomplished comedian. I get it. Yep. The Discipleship Ministries of the United Methodist Church website provides a helpful baseline for the work of trustees and all other lay committees. As you begin digging into your work as a trustee, be sure to visit umcdiscipleship.org. And of course, if you have questions or need help, folks at the conference office are there to help. Discipleship Ministries describes the function of trustees thusly. Effective trustees will function as Christian stewards of property God has entrusted to the congregation. This includes supervising and maintaining both the physical property of the congregation and gifts made to the congregation so that the ministries of the congregation can be effective and all legal requirements related to the property are satisfied. The trustees will work with the pastor, other lay committees, and the congregation in the following work. This team, subject to the direction of the charge conference, has oversight and care of all local church property, buildings, and equipment to further the mission of the church. This work is done in consultation with the pastor. Trustees receive and administer all gifts made to the congregation and make certain that trust funds of the congregation are invested properly. Trustees ensure that the articles of incorporation of the congregation are kept up to date. Trustees annually review property, liability, and crime insurance coverage on church-owned property, buildings, and equipment. They also review personnel insurance for protection against risk and consult with the pastor-parish relations team about other personnel insurance. Trustees conduct an annual accessibility audit of buildings and grounds to discover and then work toward eliminating barriers that impede the full participation of all people. The team submits annual budget requests to the Committee on Finance for property maintenance and improvement and new property purchases. Trustees are accountable to the Charge Conference and the Church Council. The term trustees, as used in the Book of Discipline of the United Methodist Church, may be construed to be synonymous with director of corporations when required to comply with law. This team and individual trustees need to engage in spiritual practices that build attentiveness to God's will and direction. Church administration and attentiveness to daily affairs can distract the team from the mission of making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Trustees need to hold one another accountable to the mission and vision of the church. So this final bullet point is where I want to spend a little bit of time. Without a doubt, trustees' work is tough. There are tons of technical issues that are going to arise. There's going to be issues with plumbing, with the sprinkler system in the front yard, with replacing fire extinguishers, and myriad issues that have to do with the normal functioning of the church buildings and the campus. Those are all technical issues for which there are answers and responses and tasks, things to do to resolve them. It's real easy to get bogged down in that. At White Rock, there were 2-3 times maybe that I was called in on a weekend or at night because somebody had discovered that there was 3 inches of standing water in the basement. Those technical issues, they are going to arise. They're going to be extremely frustrating, and they could arise at any time, and they have to be dealt with. And as such, the work of trustees can get overwhelming at times. This last bullet point tells us that just because it can be overwhelming and handling all of those technical issues can bog us down, it bogs us down and can keep us from doing probably the most important part of trustees' work, which is to understand, discuss, deploy all of the assets of the church, right? Our buildings, our lawns, our parking lots, the gifts, the funds that come in, endowments if we have them. The trustees have to figure out how to take all of those gifts and put that to the real mission of the church, which is making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. In getting bogged down with the day-to-day, the plumbing, the fire extinguishers, we can forget that that's really what we're after, is making disciples of Jesus Christ. And certainly it's very difficult to make disciples of Jesus Christ if you don't have functioning toilets. But we have to think bigger than that. We have to go beyond that. At White Rock, when we started the work here, this is a 60,000 square foot building. Most of those spaces were dedicated to programs that had the potential with bringing in new folks and making disciples. But the majority of those spaces were dedicated to that work, to those programs that were going to take place between 9 a.m. and noon each Sunday. The rest of the week, the majority of those spaces were empty. They were devoid of life. They were waiting for new life, for new partners, for new energy, for new things, for a new purpose, so that the assets of the church, the building, the things that previous generations, faithful followers of Jesus, had been able to bless this current congregation with, these buildings, this great asset. And so instead of just focusing on ourselves and on Sunday morning and what we were doing here in those Sunday morning worship programs and Sunday school programs, we looked outside the community. We recognized that White Rock was planted in a vibrant neighborhood, that there was a living, breathing entity all around us that we were not engaging with, certainly not engaging with enough. And so we decided to look outside of the church. We decided to go out and talk and really listen to neighbors and see what ideas they had, what things were they doing in their own lives, what entrepreneurial ideas did they have about church spaces and how the groups that they were in, a gardening group, a environmentalist group, how would they avail themselves of the church spaces? How would they bring their energy to the church spaces? And so we as the staff and the trustees and the other lay leadership at White Rock, as we met and listened to our neighbors, we discerned that there was a great deal of new life that could be introduced and brought about through opening the building, the physical spaces, the church campus, to folks who were not simply coming here on Sunday mornings, who had no sort of faith connection to the congregation. That was the start of the turnaround here at White Rock. It's the continued conversation that they have now in their leadership. How do we continue to reach out? How do we reach new people? How do we continue to think about our spaces differently? How do we share better in the ways that we're already sharing our spaces? How do we answer the needs that we have started to hear that are new and different than what we heard just a few years ago? That's the conversation that's still going on, and it's the conversation that I think all of our United Methodist churches and the leadership within them, especially the trustees, need to be having. So Cammie asked me if I could tell a few stories, and so I want to give you three pieces of what it took, how we made these changes at White Rock. So first off, when we first started doing this work, we had cleared out our fellowship hall space of all the things that had piled up over the years in that neglected space. I scheduled two events for the same day. One was a Christmas party for one of our oldest and most faithful Sunday school classes. And the second was from a DISD Montessori school. The PTA president had reached out to me to see if we would host their Christmas party as well. And so I scheduled them with a little bit of turnover time for the room on the same day. I wanted to test this space sharing idea. And so one of the older congregants, Bobby, she showed up a little bit early. She had mobility issues, so she needed to get there a little bit early to make sure she could get into place safely. And she looked around and she saw all these folks. There was all this excitement, all this energy going on, in a space that had just recently been cleaned out. And she called me over and she said, well, who's this then? And I told her who they were, what they were doing there. And I explained to her what we were planning on doing with the entire fellowship space, about creating a co-working space and inviting in outside groups to do all sorts of stuff. And Bobby looked at me and she said, well, I guess we're just not going to be a church anymore, are we? That was a mindset that a great many of our congregants had when we began to ask, how can we be more? How can we do more? How can we be different? How can we use the buildings in different ways? How can we invite new people in? It was a lot of the congregation had those sorts of doubts and fears about their treasured church spaces. Okay, so that's the first part. That sort of, I don't want to say prevailing attitude that Bobby demonstrated in that conversation, but that was part of it. So we looked outside of the church walls, and we looked into the community, and we started building bridges into the community, talking to folks, listening to them to see how they would use the spaces. One of the people that I was introduced to was Tammy, and Tammy was running camps out of her back house, just a couple streets over from the church. And I listened to Tammy talk about why she had created these summer camp opportunities for her own kids a few years earlier, and how now her kids were the counselors for these things, and how it was a great thing and she loved it. But she actually could see how it wasn't quite meeting the need because there wasn't enough space. And I could hear her sort of entrepreneurial spirit behind this business, and I thought, you know what? I think there's potential here for the church to help Tammy grow. So I reached back out to Tammy and said, hey, I love what you did. I love the spirit with which you do your work. I just love everything I heard. I would love to talk to you about church spaces and whether or not it could work out. So we sat down for coffee. We had that discussion. We talked and talked and talked. We talked about leases and sharing space and all that kind of stuff. And it was a relationship that grew and it evolved and it's changed. And the hallway that I was filming in for the last segment is actually the Studio Bella hallway now. The church still uses it. The church can still have children's Sunday school in that space. But all through the summer, that's Tammy's camp space. And throughout the year, she's officing in there and creating her programming that she now takes out to DISD schools all over the area. She's one of the greatest and best providers of after-school programming for DISD now. The church played a vital role in her building her business and becoming that and providing a much-needed resource for the children in our city. So we reached out, we found our community, we found our neighbors, we talked to them, we listened, we brought them in, we figured it out. So the third piece, and this is really appropriate that I end with this piece being here in the White Rock Sanctuary. When I first started at White Rock, and I would get up on Sunday mornings to do the children's time during worship, there were some Sundays where no children came forward. I would call for the children, and none would come forward. And I would invite the congregation to pray together for all of the children in the world. But we didn't have kids. After a couple of years of working with congregants like Bobby, in meeting and inviting in neighbors like Tammy, one day I called for children's time, and I watched as 23 kids came up for that moment. And I told Mitchell and Rebecca and the rest of the staff after that, I could hear the congregation gasp, right? Like, as the kids just kept coming forward. It had been growing. It had been growing for 2 years. We had added families. New people were coming. We were reaching new people. We were doing new things. But for some reason, that moment, the congregation saw those children coming forward and they realized that the church had turned a corner, that it had changed, and there was hope. And this was the fruit of the labor that we had undertaken during that time. Those three things, that mindset of doing things the same old way, of only thinking about our assets, deploying our assets in the way that we have, reaching out to new people, to new neighbors in the community, hearing them and inviting them in to participation in the church, and hearing how they would use the church spaces. And then ultimately having our hearts changed when we begin to see the fruits of what we've been laboring after. Those three instances, to me, describe the work that faces, the true work that faces the trustees of every church. How do we understand how we use our buildings? How do we keep them up? How do we understand the gifts and financial resources that come through our building? And how are we deploying that to reach out into our mission field to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world, to fulfill our mission as a United Methodist congregation? That's the work for trustees. So I've said enough. I've probably gone over, but I appreciate the time. I appreciate y'all listening to me celebrate the work that's taking place here. As I said before, the work is tough, But there are folks to labor with you in the field. The folks at the conference office are there should you need to talk about insurance and liabilities and all sorts of things. If you need guidance, be sure to reach out to them. The UMC Discipleship website is there to help clarify your function. And of course, we are here. Our group, the Church Cartographers, are available to you. We would love to have a call with you to talk about what's going on with your congregation, what hopes you have to fulfill that mission of making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. We would love to be in conversation with you. So be blessed.